In this next exercise, we're going to be adding princess seams to our pattern. Start by marking off your design line on the shoulder, and then, much as we did in the first exercise, trace around your pattern and pivot the bust dart to this shoulder point. Extend the dart legs down to the bust point, and then draw in the waist dart lines up to the bust point. Cut your pattern apart, eliminating both darts. Use a smooth curve to round out any points. To get a nice smooth fit around the bust, we need to add a little bit of ease to our side piece. To do this, we're going to draw a line from the side seam to the bust point and use the side seam as our pivot point. Slash along this line almost all the way to the side seam, and then take a corresponding snip in from the outside. Spread your pattern between 1/8 and 1/4 inch, depending on the size of your doll. Tape your slashed piece to a small scrap of paper and then trim away any extra. Add seam allowances to your princess lines by taping scrap pieces of paper along the design lines and then drawing in your seam allowances. The final step is to add notches. Put 2 notches in the seam allowance on either side of the bust point on the center piece. You want these notches to be not too close and also not too far away from the center point. Then, transfer the notches to the side section by walking the side section along the seam until you reach a notch and transferring the mark. Walk from the top down and then walk from the bottom up. Congratulations! You've just finished a princess seam. This little dress, which is the Liberty Jane Faraway Downs dress, sized for BFC dolls in this case, is a great example of princess seams coming from the shoulder. As you can see, it comes from the shoulder in both the back and the front, and it lines up beautifully at the shoulder seam. To develop a curved princess seam, start by tracing off the entire sloper. Mark notches for your waist dart and your bust dart, and then, using a straight edge, draw in both legs of your bust dart to the bust point, not to the dart tip. Trim away enough paper so that you can fold your bust dart closed and tape it. Draw in your design line from the arm's eye down to the waist. In this example, our design line is staying on the side and not actually crossing the bust point. Next, to eliminate the waist dart, measure the depth of the dart. In this case, it's about 3/16 of an inch. And then from your design line, measure over that same amount. Make a mark. And then from this mark, draw another design line, tapering to match your first design line. This will eliminate the same fullness that the waist dart would have taken out. Cut apart your pattern along both princess seam design lines. Open out your center section. This last bit of remaining dart is what's going to wind up being the ease over the bust. If this edge is jagged, you can go back in and smooth it out just a little bit. Cut out the rest of your pattern and add seam allowances along the princess lines. As a final step, we're going to add notches. In this case, unlike the straight princess seam example, we're adding the notches first to the curved side because the ease is in this case on the center panel. So once again, draw in your notches on either side of the bust point, and then from the top down, walk your center piece onto the side piece, mark the notch, and then walk from the bottom up to determine the lower notch, and transfer to the front side. This coat is a great example of a princess seam that starts at the arm's eye and extends down to the waist. Thus far, we've been showing you how to make princess designs with both a bust dart and a waist dart. However, for the American Girl and other 18-inch dolls, if there's even a dart at all in the front, it's usually only a waist dart and there is no bust dart. This makes it actually a lot easier to construct princess seams, and we're going to show you a couple of ways to do it. To make a princess seam starting from the shoulder, you simply draw your design line in, making sure that it lines up with the point of the waist dart. Then you simply cut along your lines, notch if desired, and add seam allowances, but in this case notching isn't as essential because there's nothing to ease. For the curved princess seam, once again you can see that we've drawn in our style line and then moved the waist dart over so that the same amount is taken out of the finished seam. But notice how much simpler this whole process is when there's no bust dart to be dealt with. Next, we're going to show you how to make a back princess seam. Now this sloper in particular does not have a waist dart in the back, so this process is going to be very simple. If your sloper does have a waist dart in the back, then simply develop the princess seam exactly like we just showed you for the American Girl front. Trace off your sloper onto a new piece of pattern paper. If you are designing a princess seam starting from the armhole, then at this point you can simply draw in whatever style line you like, cut apart along the line, and add seam allowance. If, however, you're doing a princess seam with a style line from the shoulder, then you're going to need to take your front princess seam piece and line it up at the shoulder to make sure that your style line matches at the shoulder. So make a notch where this seam line is, and then continue to develop your style line as desired, cut apart, and add seam allowances. So here we have our completed princess seam bodice pattern. As you can see, if you take these two side pieces and line them up, the design line will run smoothly across the shoulder seam. We've also gone ahead and labeled our pieces CF center front, side back, and center back so that we can distinguish them in future use.